Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. Today we're going to start part 4 of Little Blue Book number 49, and it is titled 3 Lectures on Evolution, written by Ernst Haeckel. No copyright date, but in the preface, written by Ernst Haeckel himself, he claims that the letters were written around 1904, 1905 to 1906, somewhere around there. And that's when he did the lectures in Germany, the 3 lectures that we're reading from on evolution. And this is part 4. Okay. So let's see, we'll go back just a little bit. So we'll get it, don't come in the middle of a train of thought. Okay, here we'll start here. It is represented only by low and small forms in the whole of the Mesozoic age, during the domination of the reptiles. Throughout this long period, which is estimated by some geologists at 8 to 11, by others at 20 or more million years, the dominant reptile class developed its many remarkable and curious forms. There were swimming marine reptiles, flying reptiles, and colossal land reptiles. It was much later in the Tertiary period that the mammal class attained the wealth of large and advanced placental forms that secured its predominance over this more recent period. The many and thorough investigations made during the last few decades into the ancestral history of the mammals have convinced all zoologists who were engaged in them that they may be traced to a common root. All the mammals, from the lowest monotremes and marsupials to the ape and man, have a large number of striking characteristics in common, and these distinguish them from all other vertebrates. The hair and glands of the skin, the feeding of the young with the mother's milk, the peculiar formation of the lower jaw and the ear bones connected therewith, and other features in the structure of the skull. Also, the possession of a kneecap, and the loss of the nucleus in the red blood cells. Further, the complete diaphragm, which entirely separates the pectoral cavity from the abdominal, is only found in the mammals. In all other vertebrates, there is still an open communication between the 2 cavities. The monophyletic or single origin of the whole mammalian class is therefore now regarded by all competent experts as an established fact. In the face of this important fact, what is called the ape question loses a good deal of the importance that was formerly ascribed to it. All the momentous consequences that follow from it in regard to other human nature, our past and future, and our bodily and psychic life remain undisturbed whether we derive man directly from one of the primates, an ape or lemur, or from some other branch, some unknown lower form of the mammalian stem. It is important to point this out, because certain dangerous attempts have been made lately by Jesuitical zoologists and zoological Jesuits to cause fresh confusion on the matter. In a richly illustrated and widely read work that Hans Kramer published a year ago, under the title The Universe in Man, an able and learned anthropologist, Professor Plastik of Heidelberg, deals with the origin and development of the human race, and admirably describes the primitive history of man and his civilization. However, he denounces the idea of man's descent from the ape as irrational, narrow-minded, and false. He grounds this severe censure on the fact that none of the living apes can be the ancestor of humanity. But no competent scientist had ever said anything so foolish. If we look closer into the fight with windmills, we find that Klotz holds substantially the same view of the Pictoid theory as I have done since 1866. He says expressly, the three anthropoid apes, the gorilla, chimpanzee, and orangutan, seemed to diverge from a common root, which was near to that of the gibbon and man. I had long ago given the name Archoprimus to this single hypothetical root form of the primates, which he calls the primatoid. It lived in the earliest part of the territory. Now, I don't know why I can pronounce this word. Tertiary, Tertiary period, and had probably been developed in the Cretaceous, from older mammals. The very forced and unnatural hypothesis by means of which Kloch goes on to make the primates depart very widely from the other mammals seems to me to be quite untenable. Like the similar hypothesis that Alsberg, Wilzer, and other anthropologists who deny our Pithecoid descent have lately advanced. All these attempts have a common object: to save man's privileged position in nature, to widen as much as possible the gulf I lost my entire place. Okay. To widen as much as possible the gulf between him and the rest of the mammals, and to conceal his real origin. It is the familiar tendency of the parvenu, which we so often notice in the aristocratic sons of energetic men who have won a high position by their own exertions. This sort of vanity is acceptable enough to the ruling powers and the churches, because it tends to support their own fossilized pretensions on a divine image in man and a special divine grace in princes. The zoologist or anthropologist who studies our genealogy in a strictly scientific spirit takes no more notice of these tendencies than the Almanach de Gotha. He seeks to discover the naked truth as it is yielded by the great results of modern science, in which there is no longer any doubt that man is really a descendant of the ape. That is to say, of a long extinct anthropoid ape, as has been pointed out over and over again by distinguished supporters of this opinion. The proofs of it are exceptionally clear and simple, much clearer and simpler than they are in regard to many other mammals. Thus, for instance, the origin of the page has been bent. Bent a long time ago. There we go. The origin of the elephants, the armadillos, the sirena, or the whales is a much more difficult problem than the origin of man. When Huxley published his powerful essay on man's place in nature in 1863, he gave it a frontispiece showing that he gave it a frontispiece showing the skeletons of man and the four living anthropoid apes, the Asiatic orangutan, the gibbon, and the African chimpanzee and gorilla. Candid comparison of these five skeletons show that they are not only very like each other generally, but are identical in the structure, arrangements, and connection of all the parts. The same 200 bones compose the skeleton in man and in the four tailless anthropoid apes, our nearest relatives. The same 300 muscles serve to move the various parts of the skeleton. The same hair covers the skin. The same mammary glands provide food for the young. The same four-chambered heart acts as central pump of the circulation. The same 32 teeth are found in our jaws. The same reproductive organs maintain the species. The same groups of neurona, or ganglionic cells, compose the wondrous structure of the brain, and accomplish that highest function of the plasm which we call the soul, and many still believe to be an immortal entity. Huxley has thoroughly established this profound truth, and by further comparison with the lower apes and lemurs, he came to formulate his important Pithecanthropy principle. Whatever organ we take, the difference between man and the anthropoid apes are slighter than the corresponding differences between the later and the lower apes. If we make a superficial comparison of our skeletons, of the Anthropomorphia, we certainly notice a few salient differences in the size of the various parts, but those are purely quantitative and are due to differences in growth, which in turn are caused by adaptation to different environments. There are, as is well known, similar differences between human beings. Their arms are sometimes longer, sometimes short. The forehead may be high or low, the hair thick or thin, and so on. These anatomic proofs of the pithecoid theory are most happily supplemented and confirmed by certain recent brilliant discoveries in physiology. Chief amongst those are the famous experiments of Dr. Hans Freudenthal at Berlin. He showed that the human blood acts poisonously on and decomposes the blood of the lower apes and other mammals, but has not that effect on the blood of the anthropoid apes. From previous transfusion experiments, it had been learned that the affinity of mammals is connected to a certain extent with their chemical blood relationship. If the living blood of two nearly related animals of the same family, such as the dog and fox, or the rabbit and the hare, is mixed together, the living blood cells of each species remain uninfluenced. But if we mix the blood of the dog and the rabbit, or the fox and the hare, a struggle for life immediately takes place between the two kinds of blood cells. The watery fluid, or serum, destroys the blood cells of the rodent and vice versa. It is same with specimens of the blood of the various primates. The blood of the lower apes and lemurs, which are close to the common root of the primitive primate stem, has a destructive effect on the blood of the anthropoid apes and man, and vice versa. On the other hand, the human blood has no injurious effect when it is mixed with that of the anthropoid apes. These anatomic proofs of the pithecoid theory are most happily supplemented and confirmed by certain recent brilliant discoveries in physiology. Chief amongst these are the famous okay, I already read that. I stopped, I paused, and took a drink, took a puff, and then came back and immediately started to read the wrong page. So let's try that over again, shall we? Here's where I should have started. When it is mixed with the anthropoid apes. In recent years, these interesting experiments have been continued by other physiologists and physicians, such as Professor Uhelhuth at Greifswald and Nuttall at London, and they have proved directly the blood relationship of various mammals. Nuttall studied them carefully in 900 different kinds of blood, which he tested by 16,000 reactions. He traces the graduation of affinity to the lowest apes of the New World, and Uhelhuth, U-H-L-E-N-H-U-T-H, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that anymore, continued as far as the lemurs. By these results, the affinity of man and the anthropoid apes, long established by anatomy, has now been proved physiologically to be in real blood relationship. Not less important are the embryological discoveries of the deceased zoologist Emil Selenkan, S-E-L-E-N-K-A-N, Selenkan. He made 2 long journeys to the East Indies in order to study on the spot the orangutan and gibbon. On the spot the embryology of the Asiatic anthropoid apes, the orangutan and gibbon. That was just fluff I skipped over. By means of a number of embryos that he collected, he showed that certain remarkable peculiarities in the formation of the placenta that had up to that time been considered as exclusively human and regarded as a special distinction of our species, were found in just the same way in the closely related anthropoid apes, though not in the rest of the apes. On the ground of these and other facts, I maintain that the descent of man from extinct tertiary anthropoid apes is proved just as plainly as the descent of birds from reptiles, or the descent of reptiles from amphibians, which no zoologist hesitates to admit today. The relationship is as close as was claimed by my former fellow student, the Berlin anatomist, Robert Hartmann, with whom I sat at the feet of Johannes Müller 50 years ago. In his admirable work on the anthropoid apes of 1883, he proposed to divide the order of primates into two families, the primary man and the anthropoid apes, and the simian, the real apes, the Catarrhine or Eastern, and the Platyrrhine or Western apes. Since Dutch physician Eugene Du Bois discovered the famous remains of the fossil ape man 11 years ago in Java and thus brought to light the missing link, a large number of works have been published on this very interesting group of primates. In this connection, we may particularly note the demonstration by the Strasbourg anatomist Gustav Schwabel that the previously discovered Neanderthal skull belongs to an extinct species of man, which was midway between the Pithecanthropus and the true human being, the Homo primigenius. And after a very careful examination, Schwalbe at the same time refuted all the biased objections that Virchow had made to these and other fossil discoveries, trying to represent them as pathological abnormalities. And all the important relics of fossil man that prove our descent from anthropoid apes, Virchow saw pathological modifications due to unsound habits, gout, rickets, and other diseases of the dwellers in the Duvial caves. He tried in every way to impair the force of the argument for our primate affinity. So, in the controversy over the Pithecanthropus, he raised the most improbable conjectures merely for the purpose of destroying its significance as a real link between the anthropoid apes and man. Even now, in the controversy over this important ape question, amateurs and biased anthropologists often repeat the false statement that the gap between man and the anthropoid ape is not yet filled up and the missing link not yet discovered. This is a most perverse statement and can only arise either from ignorance of the anatomical, embryological, and paleontological facts or incompetence to interpret them aright. As a fact, the morphological chain that stretches from the lemurs to the earlier western apes, from these to the eastern tailed apes, and to the tailless anthropoid apes, and from these direct to man, is now uninterrupted and clear. It would be more plausible to speak of missing links between the earliest lemurs and their marsupial ancestors, or between the latter and their monotreme ancestors. But even these gaps are unimportant because comparative anatomy and embryology, with the support of paleontology, have dissipated all doubt as to the unity of the mammalian stem. It is ridiculous to expect paleontology to furnish an unbroken series of positive data when we remember how scantily and imperfect its material is. I cannot go further here into the interesting recent research in regard to special aspects of our simian descent, nor would it greatly advance our object because all the general conclusions as to man's primitive descent remain one page too many, remain intact. And we're going to pause there. And there we go, we're back. Whichever way we construct hypothetically the special lines of simian evolution, on the other hand, it is interesting for us to see how the most recent form of Darwinianism is happily described by Escherich as eclastical evolution. Yeah, eclastical evolution stands in regard to these great questions. What does its astutest representative, Father Eric Wassman, say about them. The 10th chapter of his work, in which he deals at length with the application of the theory of evolution to man, is a masterpiece of Jesuitical science, calculated to throw the clearest truths into such confusion as to misrepresent all discoveries as to prevent any reader from forming a clear idea of them. When we compare this 10th chapter with the 9th, in which Wassman represents the theory of evolution as an irresistible truth on the strength of his own able studies, we can hardly believe that they both came from the same pen, or, rather, we can only understand when we recollect the rule of the Jesuit congregation: the end justifies the means. Untruth is permitted and meritorious in the service of God and His Church. The Jesuitical, oh good Lord, the Jesuitical sophistry that Wassman employs in order to save man's unique position in nature and to prove that he was immediately created by God, culminates in the antithesis of his two natures: the purely zoological conception of man, which has been established beyond question by the anatomical and embryological comparison with the apes, is said to fail because it does not take into account the chief feature, his mental life. It is psychology that is best fitted to deal with the nature and origin of man. All the facts of anatomy and embryology that I have gathered together in my Evolution of Man as proof of the series of his ancestors are either ignored or misconstrued and made ridiculous by Wassman. The same is done with the instructive facts or anthropology, especially with the rudimentary organs, which Robert Wiedersheim has quoted in his Man's Structure as a witness of his past. It is clear that the Jesuit writer lacks competence in this department, that he has only a superficial and inadequate acquaintance with comparative anatomy and embryology. If Wassman had studied the morphology and physiology of the mammals as thoroughly as those of the ants, he would have concluded, if he were impartial, that it is just as necessary to admit a monophyletic or single origin for the former as for the latter. If, in Wassman's opinion, the 4,000 species of ants form a single natural system, that is to say, descend from one original species, it is just as necessary to admit that some hypothesis for the 2,400 living and 3,600 fossil species of mammals, including the human species. The reserved structures that I have passed on the sophisms and trickery of this ecclesiastical evolution are not directed against the person and the character of Father Wassman, but the Jesuitical system which he represents. I do not doubt that this able naturalist, who is personally known to me, has written his book in good faith, and has an honorable ambition to reconcile the irreconcilable contradictions between natural evolution and the story of supernatural creation. But this reconciliation of reason and superstition is only possible at the price of a sacrifice of the reason itself. We find this is the case of all the other Jesuits, Fathers Catherine, Braun, Besmer, Cornet, Linschmeyer, and Muckerman, whose ambitious Jesuitical science is aptly dealt with in the article of R.H. France that I mentioned before. This interesting attempt of Father Wassman's does not stand alone. Signs are multiplying that the church militant is about to enter on a systematic campaign. I heard from Vienna on the 17th of February that on the previous day, which happened to be my birthday, a Jesuit, Father Giese, Giese, Geis, Father Geiss, had in a well-received address, admitted not only evolution in general, but even in its application to man, and declared it to be reconcilable with Catholic dogmas. And this at a crowded meeting of Catholics, Cathetics, Cathecists. I don't know. It is important to note that in a new Catholic encyclopedia, Benzinger's Library of Science, the first 3 volumes, issued at Einsiedeln and Cologne in 1904, deal very fully and ably with the chief problems of evolution. The first with the formation of the earth, the second with spontaneous generation, the third with the theory of descent. The author of them, Father M. Gander, makes most remarkable concessions to our theory, and endeavors to show that they are not inconsistent with the Bible or the dogmatic treatises of the chief fathers and schoolmen, but, though there is a profane expenditure of sophistical logic in these Jesuitical efforts, Gander will hardly succeed in misleading thoughtful people. One of his characteristic positions is that spontaneous generation, as the development of organized living things by purely material processes, is inconceivable, but that it might be made possible by a special divine arrangement. In regard to the descent of man from other animals, which he grants, he makes the reserve that the soul must in any case have been produced by a special creative act. It would be useless to go through the innumerable fallacies and untruths of these modern Jesuits in detail, and point out the rational and scientific reply. And the vast power of this most dangerous religious congregation consists precisely in its device of accepting one part of science in order to destroy the other part more effectively with it. Their mastery act of sophistry, their equivocal probabilism, their mendacious reservato mentalis. I don't know. The principle that the higher aim sanctifies the worst means, the pernicious casuistry of Ligori and Guri, the cynicism with which they turn the holiest principles to the gratification of their ambition, have impressed on the Jesuits that black character that Karl Hossenbrock had so well exposed recently. The great dangers that menace real science, owing to this smuggling into it of the Jesuitical spirit, must not be undervalued. They have been well pointed out by France, Eichreich, and others. They are all the greater in Germany at the present time, as the government and the Reichstag are working together to prepare the way of the Jesuits and to yield a most pernicious influence on the school to these deadly enemies of the free spirit of the country. However, we will hope that this clerical reaction represents only a passing episode in modern history. We trust that one permanent result of it will be the recognition in principle, even by the Jesuits, the great idea of evolution. We may then rest assured that its most important consequence, the descent of man from other primate forms, will press on victoriously and soon be recognized as a beneficent and hopeful truth. And that's where we'll stop for today's part 4 of Little Blue Book number 49, titled 3 Lectures on Evolution, written by Ernst Haeckel. Boom. And that was the end, also the end of the second lecture. So join me in part 5 for the third lecture, and that is titled The Controversy Over the Soul, the Ideas of Immortality and God. Thanks for listening, and join me again